Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you to purchase my new book. It's called Exit Ready Marketing, and it's already a #1 Amazon bestseller. And it covers all the core concepts that we take our clients through here at How to SaaS. It's a great read for founders, investors, operating partners, and marketers. And there's a ton of value that you're going to be able to bring back to your respective companies based on the content that's inside this book. So, my ask is go buy the book. It's available on Amazon and on your Kindle, on Barnes and Noble, and even Apple Books. Give it a read. Let me know what you think about the content, and hopefully it helps you grow your respective companies. So with that said, let's jump right in and enjoy today's podcast. Welcome to the Private Equity Value Creation Podcast, where we interview leading investors, operators, bankers, and advisors to help you answer one question: how do we increase the enterprise value of our companies? My name is Shiv and each episode I will dive deep with a guest to help you become a better value creator and capital allocator. So with that said, let's jump right in and let's get started with today's episode. My guest today is Paul Swaney, and he is the founder of Swaney Group Capital. And I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. Paul invests in industrial businesses like manufacturing, chemicals, and a bunch of other lesser known or lesser invested into types of companies from private equity firms. And what I really enjoyed about my conversation with Paul is he's a true expert in this field. And we got to dig deep into how to create value in these kinds of businesses and how that looks very different from B2B or technology or software companies. And there's a lot of great topics that we discussed from how to increase capacity to looking at the production line to increasing demand to other factors like workplace safety and all these other factors that go along with building more of this traditional or old school type of business that are often overlooked or people don't think about as much. So it's a really great conversation. And if you're an investor or a founder, there's just so much to learn from it in terms of how Paul thinks about creating value inside these companies. And even though it's not exactly about technology and the B2B sector, I think there's just so much for all types of companies to take away from the conversation. So with that said, I'll leave you to it. Enjoy the episode. All right, Paul, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hey, nice to meet you, Shiv.
Excited to have you on. So why don't we start with your background and your firm, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I started out my career in the U.S. Navy, left the Navy in 2005, went and did a variety of different operating jobs, worked in chemicals and refining, did a little stint at Amazon, and then ran a chemical business and plant and distribution center. At the time, I wrote this book. So we'd undergone a lean kind of OpEx transformation about how do you put lean and OpEx in a chemical plant where it normally doesn't go. And somehow or another, McKinsey & Company found my book and said, we're starting up this group of new ex-operators instead of newly minted MBAs. So I spent about three and a half years there doing mostly operations work for them, a little bit of strategy. Figured out I liked working for smaller companies versus big conglomerates. Got linked up with the private equity team there. Got headhunted away to go be an operating partner at a global mid-cap firm. I spent 7 years there working on the operations team, on the investment committee, and eventually going over where they merged the ops and deal team together, and then did a couple investments in the industrial space. Left there in 2022, hung up my own shingle. There's about 9 of us now, and we have 3 businesses. We have an advisory services business, which is ops transformation for private equity firms. We have a co-invest business where we like to have operating rights on the business, and we're actively trying to get a controlled deal done on the way to raise a fund.
Got it. And tell us a little bit more about the Swaney Group and your fund size and the types of companies you're looking for.
Yeah, so we're a fundless sponsor, independent sponsor, investing out of my personal account and some high net worth individuals, and a few more institutional LPs. I like buying businesses, call it from 3 to 10 in EBITDA, right? There's much more headroom to go up that way, right? You'll get about a turn and a half of multiple expansion going from 3 to 5 and then 5 to 10. There's a lot more opportunities to shoot at. And then from a sector perspective, all industrial services or manufacturing, though I do tend to lean over to the manufacturing side. It's just what I know. I grew up in a machine shop. My father was a tool maker. Can't leave the submarine in the Navy. It's basically a big factory, right? It's a nuclear power plant.
Yeah, totally. And on your side, I guess a lot of private equity firms focus on tech and B2B and those kinds of companies, and that's where a lot of the higher multiples are. Manufacturing and industrial and chemicals and all these things are kind of the non-sexy part of the private equity world, but there's a ton of capital that still goes there, and there are a ton of great businesses there. So tell us a little bit more about that opportunity and how you see that asset class.
So we have a thesis on American manufacturing, North American manufacturing, right? It's private equity got its roots. The original leverage buyout firms, were basically playing in only industrials and industrials companies. And it was very easy. Lots of founder-led businesses that were exiting. I like this space because multiples do tend to be lower. The you get into a software situation, they're playing nosebleed multiples even these days, right? So I think my last number is 35% of all private equity still goes to industrials and industrial services or manufacturing. So it's still a huge part of the private equity market. There's a lot more, I call it news around, tech and healthcare right now. Healthcare is having some interesting regulatory things in the private equity space right now. And then tech, is multiples are high and it's not as much transactions. Industrial nuts and bolts GDP growth businesses where there's a clear plan to either grow the business, take some cost out, or bolt other things to it.
Right. Yeah, I think that is totally a great insight. I think a lot of people outside the PE space and even in the PE space, when they're looking for deal flow and targets and volume, they're actually not looking at the manufacturing side or the industrial side, or even just how the PE firm or ecosystem is split. If you could be at a big firm and one arm of the business is entirely focused on B2B and tech companies, and another arm is focused on manufacturing, so investors don't really cross over between those different domains.
It's interesting. We went to the McGuire Woods Emerging Managers Conference. I do see a trend is the generalist private equity firm it feels like it's going away, particularly from a new manager's perspective, where you say, hey, we've got some transaction specialists and we'll bring in some industry advisors across tech, healthcare, services, media, telecom, and industrials, maybe some consumer, right? The theme that we heard, this was back in April, was the new managers that are getting backed are sector focused, right? And have a clear thesis, and ostensibly know something about something versus more financial engineering and deals, right? So one of the things we have kind of 8 core themes within industrials that we're looking at, and one of them is chemicals, one of them is precision manufacturing, one of them is fixed asset support for like industrial sites, like wastewater support. Anything that we are touching is something that I've either owned, operated, or have been an employee of at a company, right? It certainly adds a bit of an edge to when I'm talking to the founder or the management team. Let me give you an example. We're looking at an extrusion business, right? Now it's not perfectly fungible, but I worked at a polypropylene plant, right? And the polypropylene plant had big, large extruders there. Now they were melting and extruding polypropylene resin. This team is melting / extruding rubber. But that overlap, then at least I know what the die, and that you have to control die temperature on the extruder. So when you're having the conversation with the founder, it just becomes a little bit richer, right? And you're not trying to get up to speed or have a senior advisor speak for you when you're meeting them. I can actually have that discussion. And then the other side of that is I bring my military officer team, military professional team down to the floor with me, and they always do very well in steel toe boots. They do very well meeting the line workers. It helps add some depth to the conversation than just we have a sack of money and we might want to buy your company.
Right, totally. So expand on the investment thesis a little bit more, just to bring it to life for an audience. Like, what does that look like? Because software companies trade at 12, 15, sometimes even 20x multiples. But in this kind of a business, how do you look at acquiring and actually creating value for yourself or your other investors?
Yeah, so I want to buy something at 5 times, 6 times, that's 3 to 5 in EBITDA ish, maybe a little bit more, and underwrite a clear path to doubling EBITDA in 3 different ways. One is, we're going to take some cost out, using the Swaney Group operating system, on, whether that's, procurement or planning or manufacturing excellence, supply chain negotiations. And the second is on the commercial side, whether it's going to be pricing. Most of these founder-led businesses don't work on pricing, or they have like a uniform pricing model. They don't take care of their best customers the best. It's just very, hey, we'll do a price increase at 3%. And then the last thing potentially is if we have some M&A add to it. So my partner, when I was at the bigger asset manager, taught me, it was the best guy I could have been paired up with. He taught me that he had been so successful because he was always wrong about something. So he always wanted optionality, right? If the market goes flat and it doesn't grow at GDP, can I take some SG&A out? If I can't take any SG&A out, can I take out some COGS? If I can't take out any COGS, can I carve out a business unit to bolt something to it to make the offering more fulsome? If that doesn't work, can we aggregate a bunch of little smaller companies? So that was always his mentality. So as long as I have optionality, then I don't have a problem, right? And that's why I don't take brand risk. Like I'm never gonna, not that I would know anything about this, but I wouldn't buy like underwrite a Yeti cup. It's a $40 high gross margin business, but that can immediately go out of trend, right? And that's one of the reasons I don't like anything with pen stroke risk, like regulatory for healthcare, right? I want to make sure slow, boring, nuts and bolts businesses with a clear upside plan.
Talk about the cost side, because I think this is one of the things that's quite different inside an industrial business versus, let's say, a B2B technology or software company, because the costs on the B2B side are often just software developers or paid media ads. It's engineering expense, but there's no physical hardware and inventory and just supply chain that you need to kind of work through. So talk a little bit about that. Give us some details on how you perceive that cost takeout and how you manage the supply chain and all the different factors involved.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Nothing scales like a software business, right? It's very, very good. That said, though, I have a friend that she went and was an operating partner at Vista for many, many years, and she said there was always copious cost out opportunities, particularly in like back office and marketing and ad spend and stuff. So I don't want to say there's not really cost opportunities in software and tech, because there always are, and that's how Vista's made their money, right? But it's much more tangible, right? The best case situation that we can be in is if you have a backlog of orders or you're not selling new orders because the plant is maxed out, right? If you don't have like physical capacity, that's a cost problem, because then the math for building another factory, I mean, you're not going to, in most cases, you're not going to build another factory for like $5 to $15 million, even if it's small. It could be 50, right? So that's thing one, is how do you free up capacity at the site so that you can get more product out? That's always the play I would love to make, right? It's very positive. You can go in with a transformation story. So adding capacity is thing one from a cost. And I think if you want to take it down, it's really cost per unit, right? Cost per unit time, right? So that's thing one. Thing two that I find particularly with like founder-led businesses is raw material supplies. Founders tend to be a little superstitious and they don't like swapping raw material suppliers, right? So given a like for like, they'll have a single sourced, whether it's chemicals, whether it's steel, whether it's zinc, whether it's any raw materials, they have a long-term relationship usually with somebody. They probably haven't bid it out in 5 to 10 years, and then they will take, and they'll just eat the price increase, right? Given a like for like quality, right? And you got to be very, very careful to do this, right? You can't just cut over quickly. I want to have two suppliers for raw materials and then swing 30% of that volume back and forth every year. So you've got basically capacity, then raw material cost, then you've got indirect cost, right? Indirect cost, indirect procurement, all your shared services, your IT spend, kind of finance, finance and back office, your sales expense, right? That's usually, particularly from the founder-led side, that usually is, the founder's usually entrepreneurial, right? So they're out selling and they put more sales team in the organization and they're just solving individual micro problems, right? And so shoring that up, getting more systematized. Some of the things we've done before is outsource an inside sales team. I've done that really, really successfully. Outsource inside sales team so that leads are just coming to your plate, right? I've used account reps, right? These 1099 team members. They put an extra couple pages in the back of their catalog, right? You get sales dollars efficiency on that. And then biggest cost too is anything that's like non-core to the team, like HR, benefits administration. There's usually 2 or 3 people running around the business that are handling all that stuff. And a lot of times that's a lot more effective, kind of managed by an ADP or something like that, right? That's a simple part of the playbook.
Talk about the first piece, the capacity, because I think that one is super interesting, and also just the capital expenditure, because inside these companies there are super expensive machines, you have real estate, you have all these assets often having amortization attached to them and depreciation attached to them. Like, how do you navigate that level of, because you're kind of stuck with that no matter what, right? And in some cases you might be taking on like a burden of potentially replacing machines or needing more machines, and
Yeah.
that kind of gets needs to get factored into the value creation process.
So EBITDA is an imperfect metric in industrials, right? It's a much better metric in software. We tend not to buy big, heavy plants or look at big, heavy plants, right? Like a big piece of refinery equipment, it's falling around, it's falling apart around you all the time, right? If we go down to kind of like one level less than that, kind of batchy manufacturing, extrusion, extruders 300,000 to a couple $1 million, right? But all that stuff has to be factored in. And the diligence process gets a little bit wonky because you got to figure out how much cash the business is actually generating, right? That's a key question. How much cash is this throwing off, right? And we've lost a couple deals in the last 6 months, actually 3 or 4, based on a Q of E, right? EBITDA marketed, somebody brought us a deal, it was 3.5, 4 in EBITDA. It's really throwing off 1.5 to 2 in cash, right? There's 500,000 of one-time CapEx in there that just happened to happen last year. And right, it's a deal because right then the valuation multiple swings, right? So that is a huge thing you have to look at. And that's one of the reasons, I liked, having the experience of being in so many factories. I think I've been to about 200 factories in the last 15 or 18 years. And like knowing what breaks, knowing, what's a burden. Like I have a sore spot for vacuum pumps. And like I know you're gonna have to replace them once a year. And if I don't see that on the list and they got vacuum pumps, they're gonna have to be rebuilt. So you just have to kind of know the space well enough or get an advisor in that can walk you through that if you're going industrials. On the
What
first
is, just jump in? What is the metric? Because I totally get it. EBITDA doesn't exactly tell you what the free cash flow of the business is. So how are you figuring that out? Are you just looking at cash on cash? Like,
EBIT's
what's
better. I like EBIT, but it's just you can't bid off EBIT, right? You can't bid. Nobody is like, what is this? So you kind of have to bid off EBITDA, but free cash flow conversion, right? I've seen some extrusion businesses like aluminum that we're looking at that was like 12, 15 in EBITDA, but it's really 6, right? I mean, it's just a horrible service that you got to replace a bunch of stuff every single year. You can fix that efficiency ratio if one of the projects that I do less often would be like maintenance efficiency, but you got to get to a bigger business, call it 100, 200 million revenue that's got 20 or 30 maintenance techs run around, right? Because the way, it's not doing as much maintenance as possible. It's doing the right maintenance and monitoring it so you can hit something before it goes down hard, right? But that's the, I mean, look, I'm pretty familiar with packaging lines, right? You can always get a 1957 Chevy to run like a 1957 Chevy by replacing parts and doing proper maintenance, but it's never going to perform like a refinery. But there is, or like a Ferrari, right? But there is a system that you can get with operator maintenance to reduce your overall maintenance cost, keep things properly clean, lubed, and inspected, and then like use that like as a way to drive down your maintenance costs. But that's a 3-year play and be much more for an asset you're going to kind of keep and hold in the portfolio.
are you similar to, are you spending time on that doing diligence to look at the machine life cycle and potential replacement costs and beyond just what's on balance sheets and what you're seeing in terms of EBITDA?
So I would never do a manufacturing company purchase without hitting every site. The amount of time you're going to get on site is variable. If it's in a banker process, you might get 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Even at a 1 million square foot site, I've been in that situation before. The the key is to go out to the floor and just it's very obvious things, right? It's how clean is the site? It's is there rust on the machinery, right? I mean, it's stuff oiled, right? It's talking to the operators and asking them like, how often does this go down? When's the last time you replaced a drive motor, right? If they know these things on the floor and the floor workers know what happens to the machinery and are like in tune with the machine, it's a little hokey, but you can get like qualitative information. You have to underwrite a full replacement of basically half the kit
Oh, you
before
do. You're saying you're doing that no matter
you
what.
have to say if you one of our scenarios is you have to go what that we run our guy Santiago in Colombia he runs is what if half the plant broke, major break, couldn't fix it, how does that affect the cash flow situation, where does that affect, how much debt can we put, you have to run that
You
scenario.
have to, yeah, because there's so much
You
risk you're taking on.
so much risk, right? And that's why we like things that tend like there's a as an example, something we're looking at right now is a consumer products manufacturer, non-branded. It's more of it's sort of like a contract manufacturer, more B2B, but then B2C. They're doing like mixing and blending in some large, what look like KitchenAid mixers. You can replace them for $200,000. They got 6 or 8 of them. It's fine, right? Where you get into the thing is if you have one piece of equipment on 30 million in revenue, like one main extrusion lines and maybe some packaging or finishing things, that gets to the point not as underwritable. Because if you throw, I mean, you can always replace a die, you can replace a screw in the extruder, but at some point, if it goes down hard, you got to underwrite a major rebuild and a major loss of revenue during the time you're fixing it for force.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because not only is it broken and there's a cost, but you can't service revenue now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me ask you, how often are deals falling apart at this stage? I would imagine a lot of these deals fall apart right here.
So I've had more things fall apart on quality of earnings, on quality of earnings versus versus like
The
CapEx
risk and
spend.
underwriting.
Yeah, that tends to be a little bit more what's the right way to say this? That tends to be, if I get to somewhere where it's CapEx, I might lean a little bit, right? And say that. But I try not to look at things where 100% of the production goes through one piece of equipment.
Right. Because you don't want that risk as you're deploying all this capital. Side question is, because you're talking about cash and EBITDA and all these things and valuation as pertaining to that. In a lot of these cases, especially if they're family run and family owned, and I have friends like this who have 2 or 3 generations worth of a manufacturing business, there's a lot of volume and revenue that is cash based that for tax evasion purposes, for lack of a better word, people are doing off the books. So how does that get factored into the valuation? Because from the family business's standpoint, they are incentivized to keep that, and the business is worth way more to them than appears on the balance sheet. And then you as an investor are being asked to pay for that, but you can't see it properly.
Yeah, I haven't seen the like revenue games as much, right? We have a process where we'll do like a litmus check quality of earnings in house, and we're matching invoices to GL codes and stuff. And the team, we do that pretty quickly. I would like to make a bid. What I have seen is, and it's almost ubiquitous. I've seen a founder's lifestyle like run entirely through the P&L. And like this one gentleman had a $2 million travel line item.
Oh, wow.
And it was on like 25 in revenue, right? It was like a meaningfully big number, and we get credit for some of that. If you're going to sell your business, here's a tip: if anybody's listening, you might want to clean the P&L up a couple years before, instead of taking the tax benefits.
Totally, yeah, because you're basically deflating your EBITDA.
You're deflating your EBITDA, and look, it's like, I mean, I'm not going to say everybody does it. I will say it is very tempting.
A lot of people do it.
It's very tempting, right?
A lot of people do it. Yeah. That's totally true. Talk to me about the capacity piece. I know we kind of went on a tangent there, but what are some ways that you're looking to free up capacity? Like, for example, like if a company can, let's say, produce 100 units a day or per month, what are the levers available to them to increase capacity without investing in another factory, more machines? And because that CapEx is just, I'm assuming, ruins your underwriting. So you kind of have to figure out within whatever's there at the current moment.
I have yet to find a company that didn't have at least 30% latent capacity in their factory. And I will say that again. I have yet to find a company that did not have 30% latent capacity. The best manufacturing companies in the world, from like process manufacturing, or Toyota and Procter and Gamble and Danaher, and like a Procter and Gamble, like a diaper line will run at 85% ish, what we call overall equipment effectiveness, or OEE. I've yet to go to a middle market founder-led business that was over 50 OEE. And the losses associated with that, with how many times it stop and jam a day, how many major maintenance downs do you have a day or a week? Are you running the thing at the full speed? How long does your product changeover process take? How much scrap are you making? How much quality errors are you making? Each one of those levers has a different playbook that we've codified over the years to attack. It's going to be like dealer's choice, like you roll the dice. The biggest one that I could say happens to most sites is long changeover times, and the other side of that too is a reticence to actually perform changeovers, what I always tell the sites is, guys, you're thinking about this backwards. You want to amortize your changeovers and your product grade changes so you don't have to do them as often. I want to make you a changeover expert, right? So if you can treat this, if you can move from being from being like, me changing a tire on the side of the road to the F1 pit crew changing a tire, those are two entirely different processes, right? And so and then I like buying high SKU diversity businesses. That's one of our themes. Is like serves aerospace or serves defense, high SKU diversity, right? If you have like 200 core SKUs, right? If it takes you 4 months to make all 200 of those SKUs because of changeovers, you can't get product to your customer for 4 months. If you shrink that time down, you can cycle your product in a wheel and then also add capacity.
How do you do that?
It's machine uptime is the biggest one, killing changeover time, right? Product, so machine setup, right? I mean, you're lots of simple things. How do you standardize the setups between shifts, right? Every production line I go to, you got the night shift operators, the mid shift operator, the swing shift operator, day shift. They all run it a little bit different, right? They all run a little bit different. They all like their set points. Sometimes they slow the machines down. They don't want it to break or drop. And what you want to do is run it as fast as you can get it, where it runs most of the time. And then when it does go down, you want to problem solve those micro events. And then you can open up the operating window and get the machine to actually run better. And a lot of that's going to be involved. Oh, this went down because you're running faster. You messed up this suction cup. You messed up this suction cup on the packaging line change. It wore out. You're going to have to replace that more often now. And you can't do this by yourself in an engineering team. You got to have like trained 200, 150, 200 operators out there finding these little inefficiencies every single day, so you can problem solve them individually, right? And it's 6 to 12 months to get from call it a 40% OEE up to a 50% OEE, but that basically adds you 25% of a factory, right? For basically no capex, some opex likely.
Right. Well, how do you operationally figure that out on your side? Because in software companies, PE firms will have operating partners that are maybe sales experts or marketing experts or product experts. In this case, it's the barrier or gap seems to be a ton of technical knowledge and know-how that is very specific to a particular business, because every manufacturing business, I assume, has different machinery and very different details associated with that. So is there somebody on your team? Do you hire outside resources? Is it you? Like, how are you figuring that piece out?
So I'm what I will call a manufacturing generalist. I've been to a lot of plants. I got a little bit of a spike in chemicals, a little bit in packaging and distribution, but not an expert, right? So the key to this is all about a respect for people. I am never going to know an individual production line better than an operator or maintenance tech specifically that's worked at that site for 30 years, right? But I can apply some structure and a framework to get those team members to get all their good ideas on paper and get all the things that they wish they had before, right? And basically facilitate the process. Where the expertise comes in more is it's from a credibility perspective, right? Like I've been in situations where some private equity associates, I'm like, can you please get some steel toe shoes and not walk in here with your Gucci loafs, right? And so like we have just enough manufacturing experience that we can go in and be credible and help extract the ideas from the operations team. From an underwriting perspective, I've personally just looked at enough factories that I can walk around and say, okay, I could count pieces off the line, or I'm out there an hour, I'll count how many stops the machine had and say, hey, this is 30, 50, or 60, and then, I can underwrite an 8 to 13% increase pretty comfortably. Outside, it's usually much more than that, but I won't underwrite it. And that's one of the things I'm working on now is training my second generation to how to go out in the factory and look at the different spots and how to spot opportunity at a high level. Because you got a dual mission, right? You got to get the investment done and build a relationship with the team, but you've also got to spot opportunity simultaneously. So you're kind of having a conversation with the team and asking good, insightful questions, but you're really scanning around and taking pictures of things that you think could be accretive to adding to the capacity.
It's almost like a moat or a competitive advantage to have that, because even if another investor wants to go into this market to buy companies, they may not have the technical know-how to navigate the ins and outs of different industrial businesses. So you kind of need to have that in-house.
So, I mean, the industrial ones were the first sector-focused firms. There's a firm I've worked with, bumped into on an asset called American Industrial Partners. And I don't want to imply like you can't learn this stuff. It's not that complicated, right? There's a a gentleman there named Dino that, I mean, I've walked the plant with him and I wouldn't know that he grew up in finance. Like absolutely. He grew up in a plant, and he can talk mass flow meters with the best of them. So it's like, it is a learnable skill, right? But I that's where I think the theme in the industry is you're going to see the sector focus kind of come back versus generalist, kind of a low interest rate environment. We buy what's available.
Yeah, it is more rare though. Like I think not everybody has a person like that, I guess, or at least it feels like to me. Maybe we haven't interacted with as much with folks that are doing these kinds of investments, but it does feel like the variable because, for example, in software, like all the different components are similar. The tech stack is similar. The code base is similar. You might have the same payment gateway. Like over time, everything looks very similar. But I think in this,
I think yours is way more confusing. Right. Like I honestly, I'm like, I would never touch that. Somebody's like, I wanted to maybe dip my toe into like some obscure supply chain tech software,
Yeah.
right? Like, that was like clearly overlapping. To me, this is how I look at it. A factory, you ship some stuff in the front door, you do something to it, and you ship it out the back door. It's that simple to me.
Right.
That what you do, what you're shipping in and shipping out, and how much of it is a little bit different. But the point you're making is valid. It's like what you're comfortable with and what you know.
It's funny,
And
yeah.
nobody can know software and healthcare and manufacturing. It's not possible.
It's a lot to know about. Yeah, so it's whatever you're in, the other side looks more complicated, but for the people inside of it, maybe it's more second nature. That's really
I met a gentleman off Twitter that does software investing. It's like small cap software investing. And anytime I have a software question, I give him a call. Like anytime. It's and he's like, I know he's like, this is the most basic question ever. But then he called me the other day. He's like, hey, I'm thinking about carving this FDA regulated business out. I'm like, this is what you have to watch out for. You got what they're going to come out and look at this when it transacts, blah, 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 blah,
blah. That's great. Actually, I have a funny story, completely random, but
yeah.
My first job was in a manufacturing plant, and we made stuff, and I broke a machine on the second day, and that was how I got fired 2 days in.
Oh no,
that's how you know you're destined to be an entrepreneur.
I didn't see that going that way.
2 days in, shut the line down for like 2 hours. They were super upset. So when you're talking about uptime and everything, I'm like, that story came back to me.
So I'll tell you, an old manager of mine made a mistake as an engineer that put a 40,000 pound piece of solid plastic into a chemical reactor, and like they had to shut it down for 3 weeks and cut it out with hydraulic chainsaws.
Oh my god!
And yeah, I mean,
that's way worse.
I would be lying to you if I said I didn't pull my fair share of boners in manufacturing sites, but
that's funny. Yes, I'm assuming it happens more than that.
Yeah.
I have a secondary question. As you talk about increased capacity, so with the people that I know in the manufacturing space that own these types of businesses, I find that they don't even have some of the most fundamental things in place from a go-to-market, sales, marketing perspective to actually drive up demand. So increasing capacity is one part of the equation. I totally get that. But then you could have all this increased supply and not the demand to meet it. So how much work do you do on that side? Or is it just a case of like, there's just so much demand that if they can just manufacture the supply, they can sell it to existing customers and find more revenue that way?
I find about 1 in 4 times they could go sell as much as they want and the plant can't make it, which is the worst situation to be in. It's such a missed opportunity. I find most of the time. So if you think about how these founded, most entrepreneurs that manufacture things were engineers that sold something and had some customers, and then the manufacturing became an afterthought. Right? Nobody goes out and says, I want to start a manufacturing business to make things. It just doesn't happen. They start a business because they see a market need and they get in there, right? So you've got this entrepreneur founder and they goes, oh, I got to build a plant, right? I got to build a plant now. Or I was making it in my machine shop. We should scale up. So the manufacturing becomes an afterthought because really, I mean, sales is the most important part of business, right? It's painful. When I was going through the global financial crisis and it was like we'd gotten enough capacity at the site I was managing, we had to shut the site down. We didn't have any sales because it was all construction products. And so nothing happens in business until you get a sale. So, but most of these founders, they start as sales professionals, but they get to a point, like we were looking at this diamond cutting tool business, and we get to the point he was making, like he was paying himself, I don't know, $1 million, $1.5 million a year of dividend. And I mean, he had a couple places. He had a place in Park City, he had a place out in the Bahamas, I think. And it's like, he just didn't have the energy to go selling it. He's like, why? Is where he was at, right? And then we dig under the hood. There's no outbound reach, no outbound at all. They're just taking infinity calls. You might get another order, right? You're not getting no new product introduction, right? The founders will get to this like spot where it's like, do I really want to go build another plant, right? So those are the things we like to tease out. Is like, is it potential to grow the market? Is it potential to get new customers? What are the current processes? I totally agree that they don't have any processes. It was one guy.
There's no tracking. There's like one sales guy usually.
Nothing. It's exactly right. It's a
Yeah.
founder, maybe another sales guy. It's exactly,
Yeah.
which is, it's great. So then you go, we'll just add some salespeople. I tend not to do it that way. I tend to go, hey, let's get catalog reps first so we can try them out. Because sales guys are hard to hire. I mean, they're hard to hire, particularly with a product they haven't sold before. But hey, you can get this, then bring one over as a full time, if possible. And because you don't want to go, the only thing worse than like not calling is getting a bunch of orders and not being able to make.
And not being able to
Right?
fulfill. Yeah.
That's the worst situation.
Yeah. It feels to me like the order of operations would be increase capacity. There's definitely existing customers that will buy more from you if you're able to produce more. But then from there, like with these businesses that I've met, I've seen that they don't actively have a program to acquire more partnerships or more of these referral people that like, because in every manufacturing sector, like there's a lot of related businesses that have the same set of customers. So going after those types of people, there's no inbound motion, there's no website that's properly set up. Like there's all these fundamental things that aren't in place. Like even just there are people, it seems crazy, but there are Google searches for things like steel manufacturers and they will not advertise for stuff like that. And so it just very basic playbooks can yield like returns for decades because there's no competition for things like that. But for whatever reason, if the founder is comfortable and there's a pretty good business to be had, they usually don't have enough of an incentive to execute on those things.
So it's also mind share, right? It's like return on mind share. I talk about that a lot, like return on energy, and like what do you do? Right, that's one of the things that as we've gotten in co-invest type things. It's a hard no for us. Is like if we're gonna put money in this, you will take one of us will be on the ground, right? Part of that is to organize and do some of those processes. Part of those is to kind of keep the trains running on time as we're adding KPIs, as we're adding systems. And then it's, look, I've seen a lot of underwritten value creation plans with 12 to 15 initiatives on it. In my experience, those don't get done. Do 3 meaty things in year 1, knock those off the list, set up proper governance, add another thing in. When it comes off the list, add another thing in to do. And, I mean, it's very few people can do 7 or 9 things well, right? And the one thing I said, another gentleman on Twitter said, a lot of founder-led businesses cap out at 2 million EBITDA because they haven't brought the talent in that can actually can trust or get anybody, get to the, get on the next level, right? And that's, one of the things I can't wait to drop. We have a ex-Navy SEAL Lieutenant Commander, Trey Fisher, that is next on deck to go to an asset. And everybody loves him immediately. He's very jovial. He listens to the guys. He runs around steel-toe boots. Getting him to slot new initiatives through, particularly to a little bit of admin. Most of these founders are 60, and do they really want to go set up an external outreach system?
Yeah, it's not really a priority. And you brought up something that's interesting is, a lot of these founder or family run businesses, as you're coming in as an investor, or often let's say you're buying out the firm, like there's a risk. How much do you vet the team? Because I feel like in a lot of these companies, there's like 1 or 2 people that know everything, and then everybody else is kind of like a doer. And so there's this big gap between people who really know the business, and there's like a continuity risk associated with the acquisition. So how do you see that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I don't really want to walk away deal where the founder goes, right? I want to do at least 12 months of transition. Prefer to put them on a 3-year consulting agreement. The 3 LOIs we have signed that they had signed previously that fell apart. The founder was like, 3-year consulting agreement. I want you to go to the trade shows with us. You go to the trade shows with us. It's very, very important, right? Because it takes about 2 to 3 years to hand over a good relationship, right? And if you're serving bigger clients, we're looking at a business that had they had large chemical manufacturers. You almost have to marry yourself to them until the procurement person swaps out, and so they know you as the new person that's been servicing the account, oh, this business has been serving us. Oh, this is just our contract. That is the biggest risk in buying some of these founder-led businesses. From an assessment perspective, I don't do a lot there. Our plan is to equitize everybody in the business. There's a lot of like, is it ESOP worth it? Some sort of equity type or equity-like incentive package, whether it's an exit bonus, for the, I'm making this up, top 10%, top 5% of the team. It's just good business. It's good business, and yeah, but that is the biggest risk I find is the founder
Is
risk.
the person, the key
there.
person, and I guess your way of managing that is trying to incentivize them to stay for at least 3 years. Do you try to put in like a management team after the fact, and how do you underwrite that? Because that obviously increases your cost base.
So my goal would be to second. My goal is to second everybody at an asset. So second one of my mid-level professionals, we call transformation directors, at every single asset. That has killed 25-30% of our things that we put a potentially binding bid on. They just don't. So I'm starting to introduce it now. They just don't want to do it. A lot of founders, or some founders, want to sell their business, get a liquidity event, keep 20%, and then run it like nothing else has happened, right? Like they haven't had the change. So that's
Right.
I mean, it's like, they want to swipe the ATM machine, but then just, kind of go away.
Yeah,
That's
it's still my business. Yeah, right.
It's still my business, right?
Right.
So that's thing one there. So I want to have one of my mid-level professionals around, set up, whatever you want to call them. I don't care. Chief of staff, project manager,
president, whatever. Yeah,
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And then that person is learning the business from the founder, right?
Yeah.
Learning the business from the founder, building the relationship with the founder, getting stuff done on the kind of cost side out, or sales side out, so that in 12 months when the founder wants to step away, maybe we put the founder on the board, and he gets a pretty good gig, he or she gets a pretty good gig, 100K a year to show up to, I don't know, 12 meetings a year, if you're lucky, and then, monitor it, and then we can, help get the person back in there. I also want, on every deal we've been negotiating, it's like, we'd like you to roll 10-15%. So their second bite, their second bite at it. We were looking at something the other day. The founder was like, "I just want to walk," and I'm like, it's a bit like, it's a little used car sales, and you're like, you know what I mean? You drive it down the street, if wheels fall off.
For sure. Yeah, I think the people side is the hardest thing, because that continuity is critical to like whatever your thesis is to making that come true. So
yep.
That makes sense. Last thing I want to ask, just there's a grab bag of other things that come about with a company like this, like workplace safety and insurance and things like that. Like, how do you factor that into your decision making?
So I don't want a company to have bad safety, but I'll take it. So there's a metric called EMR, which is experience modification rate. If it's a 1.2, you're paying 20% more for your workers' comp insurance, right? That's an opportunity for me, right? Like, so I'm hyper passionate about safety. Like, every human being deserves to be able to go to work and show up and take care of their family and come home in the same condition that they went every single day, right? Like, that is a fundamental human right from my perspective. Not everybody thinks that way. Not everybody prioritizes it. The irony of this, though, is safe plants are correlated with efficient plants, right? Because if there's stuff on the floor and it's falling over and the machine's not clean and there's oil leaks, right? And people are not using their PPE. If somebody gets, even just culturally, if somebody is not wearing their safety glasses and a chip hits their eye, the whole plant, you may not turn the equipment off, but the whole plant is distracted. The whole factory isn't really working hard that day. They're just trying to see if Jimmy's okay. And so that's, if there's a safety problem, and, we look at OSHA metrics, it's like the recordable rate. If they are above benchmark, that's the best way to get in there and drive like real change, because it's the best case, because nobody can argue. You go, guys, we got to clean safe performance up. PP is not going to be an option. This is important. You got to lock and tag out your equipment. Like, that's a great case to get in there. As like, I hesitate to say Trojan horse because it's just a horse, but you get that in there and you start that, and then you go, oh, this really is getting better. They really do care. And then you can peanut butter in the efficiency initiatives too. Right. So it's like, it doesn't scare me. There was a business I looked at before that made the news that had a horrible safety record. And there was a question in our investment committee, like, should we do this? And I was like, this is an easy fix. The team is not locking out their equipment and people are turning it on. And they're turning it on, and the team is getting candidly, like some amputations. And one of the things that the founder of the private equity firm said, he's like, we're going to get the best safety person on the board of this business. If we're going to do this, we're going to make it right. And that's a pretty good conversation. We didn't end up running the bid, but it's I could have fixed that in 6 months. It's just, do you want to spend the money, and do you want to actually fix it?
Do you worry about the legal exposure in situations like that?
If they've got a laundry list of all workers' comp claims, it's more legal due diligence that you have to fight through.
Yeah.
I could size them. If somebody's got 3 open lawsuits, it's probably a deal killer for me. If I was, if flash forward 10 years, we're looking at a 20 million EBITDA business, it would have to be very, very bad to scare me away. I like risk. It's not really a risk. Improving safety is almost the most underwritable upside you can have.
Yeah, it's a really interesting take on that. I would have, before I asked the question, I was thinking about it as a potential detractor, but as you're speaking, it's like, yeah, it's a clear value creation opportunity, because if you can improve that, along with that improved efficiency and capacity, kind of goes hand in hand. So that makes a ton of sense.
It's I have found cases of bankers trying to massage safety numbers down so they're better, they look better, and it's like honestly, I just look at insurance costs, I look at rates, because they have to give me their OSHA 300 logs, which is the annual reporting form. They have to give that. And look, if they killed 2 people, might be too much to go for.
Yes,
right. No, it might be too much to go for.
No, we shouldn't laugh. That's actually pretty bad. But yes.
Right. No. It's right. It might be too much. Because it's absurd. The reason you laughed is because it's absurd that happens in the United States.
But it does happen. Yeah.
It does happen.
Yeah.
It's like there's a lot of people buying roofing businesses right now. That's in vogue. That is one that I actually might shy away from, because like 45% of all falls where your feet are over 10 foot are fatal. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, it's way more than you would think. Wow. The feet have to be over 10 foot, because you fall, hit your head. You hit your head, you break your neck. It's that's brutal. Yeah. I think somebody dies. More than one person dies every day from a fall in the U.S.
Wow. Yeah. So things like that, I would have thought would be a detractor, but as you're speaking about it, it's like it's a way to also make a good impact in these businesses, right? Because if it's actually a way to improve the human experience at work, and it also helps create value, it kind of goes hand in hand. It's a different type of take on the cultural side of the business. So
yeah, we had a field services business at my former employer, and no fault of the employee, he was a road worker, and somebody blew through a cone and unfortunately pinned him against a truck, killed him, and his poor wife was pregnant, and the firm, I think they paid his salary for like multiple years.
Right.
Multiple years. It's just as sad. But so anything you can do to help that is like, it's not just good business. It's just the right thing to do.
It's a good cause. Yeah. So I think that goes along with the thesis of the types of companies that you're investing in. So you kind of have to factor that in. And I think it's interesting, because in B2B companies, people talk a lot about culture as like culture. And in manufacturing, industrial, these types of companies, I feel like culture is talked about way less, because it's just more about making sure the trains run on time and delivering whatever you set out to deliver. But as a result, I feel like the experience of people in those jobs is just not as good. But it's just as important, if not maybe more important, because manufacturing process is so dependent on people, that it, like, from a continuity perspective, retention is really important of people as well. So investing in that makes just so much sense, and it's a form of culture in these kinds of businesses.
Yeah, so we talk about like 6 things that we're assessing any production system on. One of them is leadership behaviors, and one of them is culture and capabilities, and OpEx, other stuff. But that you can take 2 identical plants, and the one with the positive culture, positive safety history, can get out 2 times as much as the exact identical equipment, exact same number of people, exact same cost basis, purely on culture alone. The book I wrote was dated. I wrote it when I was still, when I think it was like 30, and but it was cultural Kaizen. The whole thing's about culture and org culture and change. And I think people have to understand that it's not just like the what snacks do you have in the break room, right? Particularly manufacturing, working with things that can kill you, like they literally can kill you, right? And so culture there is just as important as that everybody's happy at the financial services firm, right?
That's awesome. One thing you mentioned that I just want to touch on this as well is you mentioned Kaizen and Six Sigma and lean manufacturing and all the stuff that Toyota made popular. And like, how much of that are you bringing into these companies? We talked about manufacturing process, but just dive into some of the technical stuff there.
Yeah, so all those words are great. The bottom line is every organization needs a system for improving things, right? You're always getting fought in manufacturing by inflation, right? I mean, it's been really bad lately, right? But your inflation's always working against you. Ostensibly, you give every operator a 2.5 to 3.5% raise every single year, and that's going to hit you. Maintenance cost of parts are going to go up every single year. So if you're not squeezing juice out of your existing kit with a structured process and a structured system, you are making less and less money every single year. So that's kind of the underpinning. What you call it or what you do with it depends on the industry you're in. If you're at a big refinery, Six Sigma makes a lot more sense. It's a little more technical. You need statistical tools. I've done projects like that. If you get down nuts and bolts to assembly manufacturing, it's all about lean and Kaizen and 5S and kitting and just on time parts. And the key is to make your system for the site fit for purpose, right? So your metrics that you're measuring, how you schedule production, is all part of this like management processes that we assess for. Most of these companies have none of it. Just hanging whiteboards and having structured discussions in front of whiteboards and planning out your day and scheduling better. You can implement that initiative in 1 to 4 weeks. And one of the guys on our team, Ben, says you can't avoid a whiteboard. We put up a whiteboard because you can't avoid it, right? Everybody wants to put this in Excel and make some let's put a whiteboard up. It's a 6 foot by 8 foot whiteboard. We made 57 units, right? So that's the baseline to it. Once you get that OEE up from 40% to 65, 70%, it takes a little bit more technical tools, right? You're analyzing mean time between failure of little pieces, parts, right? You probably have to hire a process engineer. None of the companies we looked at yet have had more than one process engineer, and it probably wasn't the best one. But as you get more and more mature, you need more and more technical tools. But the problem is when you go more and more technical, you get less with the culture and the hands-on the operator. I would rather have 150 operators trained that we've trained to do Kaizen projects, to do single point lessons, to do A3 problem solving. They'll shut the line down, figure out what broke, fix it, sketch an idea, start it back up, submit it to procurement. I want like 100 people improving things versus 3 engineers in a room, right? It always works better. You do get good enough at some point, you got to do all of them. You got to do both. But to get from 40 OE to 85 OE is probably a 10-year journey, 7 to 10-year journey. But that's literally doubling your plan. Some of the business we look at are like 5 to 15% OE. So like you can get up to 30, you double your output, then get up to call it 50 to 60, you add 50% more from that. And it's meaningful. Like you should never have, in most cases, I shouldn't say never. I've yet to find a private equity business that I've toured the plant, or a founder-led business that I would said we have to build another plant based on the growth they have.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about that. It's like, in order to make all of these process improvements, you really need buy-in and execution at the front line, because those are the people that are actually executing on this stuff daily. Can't just be done in a room on a spreadsheet. It has to be executed. One of my other odd jobs that I had back in the day was working at the back end at FedEx and in the the package processing area. And there was just so much process and technology involved in order to make that thing run. And at the front line, everybody was super empowered to be able to do certain things. And so you can kind of see why FedEx is as efficient as it is. How much technology are you bringing into these companies, like software or tracking and cameras? There's all these innovations happening in the industrial manufacturing sector. Like, are you bringing that into these investments as well?
So short answer, not very much is needed, right? So I have a friend of mine that he only I think he's like a 3 or 4 turn CEO with a 3x exit each time, something obnoxious. He will not do an asset that needs a new ERP. He will do a warehouse management system, but you lose 2 years if you're putting in a ERP system. So probably not, right? Family office isn't if you own a family office in the business, it's a little bit different discussion. But the tech I would bring in would be like a standalone scheduling package that fits down on the shop floor, right? How do we get a new product wheel better? What's the most efficient way to do the product wheel? Is there a maintenance system, right, that I can put on an iPad with an OtterBox on it that, we've got 5 or 7, 10 maintenance techs that they can look at it more effective. Very simple, discrete tools that probably aren't adding up into a tech stack, right? And then you want to prepare that. And so the part of your sales story you can get is like this company, we've got everything set up that if you guys want to integrate it into your ERP, you're good to go, right? That's part of the sales story, right? And then they can say, now, once you're over and making this, when that works till you're 100, 200 million in revenue, after that, you're going to have to bite the bullet. If I own an asset that we grow from 30 million revenue to 150 million revenue,
that's a good problem to have. Yeah,
it's a good problem to have, right? It's a good problem. We probably div recapped it 2 or 3 times. It'll be fun. But you lose all improvement for 2 years. Like,
right.
Line it out. It's yeah.
That's awesome. Paul, we're coming up on time here. So I would love to keep talking. I have so many more questions, but with that said, if people want to learn more about you, where can they go and find you? And we'll also link out your book, but just any details that you can share, we'll share with you.
Yeah, so you can find me, Paul W. Swaney III, on Twitter. Also, Swaney Group Capital is on Twitter. Shameless plug, we will start Q3 of next year hiring. Our class will start hiring kind of May of next year. Transitioning veterans or kind of ex-investment bank, 1 year investment banking. Application will go out in Q4, early Q1 of next year for a May start. Looking to hire 5 to 7, maybe 8 more people.
Awesome. We'll be sure to include all that in the show notes. And with that said, Paul, thanks for coming on and sharing your wisdom. Very different episode. We often have a lot of B2B or technology investors, and this was a very different take, and I got to explore that with you. So appreciate you sharing all that.
Super. Love to have you come down to St. Petersburg to the office. Happy to buy dinner.
Only if you take me golfing.
I got a couple guys that'll definitely take you golfing.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, man.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Before you take off, just a few requests from our side. Number one, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Spotify or YouTube or wherever you go to listen to your podcasts. Number two, if you are in the market for due diligence services, strategy consulting, or fractional CMO services, please get in touch with us at www.howtosas.com. And third, please buy a copy of my new book, Exit Ready Marketing. It covers a ton of concepts that we take our customers through, private equity investors, B2B companies, CEOs, operating partners, and marketers. And there's a ton of great value in there that expands on my previous book, Post-Acquisition Marketing, as well. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed today's content, and we'll see you on the next episode.